Welcome to Thriller Recaps. In this movie, the BFG, a young girl befriends a giant who refuses to eat humans, but things change when other giants find her. Watch till the end to find out what happens. And if you like it, please like, share, and subscribe. The movie begins with Sophie, a 10-year-old girl living in a London orphanage, closes the orphanage after the matron forgets to. She sorts the mail she had found at the door, changing the clock to 3 o'clock in the morning. She goes upstairs but she hears some men making noise in a nearby alleyway, so she shouts at them, threatening to call the police. She lays on her bed, picking up a book to read, but just then the matron opens the door, so Sophie fakes being asleep. After the matron leaves, she resumes reading her book, but her cat runs to the balcony. She goes to the balcony to carry the cat back inside when she sees some cats knocking a trash can down. A large hand appears to the right of the trash can, which shocks Sophie, making her gasp, and she is heard. It turns out to be an elderly giant man. Sophie runs back into her bed, covering herself, but the giant man captures her and runs away with her, disguising himself at every turn to avoid getting caught. He jumps into an opening in a cloud, which is an entrance to his home in Giant Country, and he takes her to his house. In his house, Sophie tries to escape but she's unsuccessful. She hears talking from a distance outside the giant's house, so she peers outside to see a group of giants. The giant tells her the names of the other giants, which suggests that they eat human flesh. He laughs at her when she asks if he eats humans too, telling her that he doesn't. She demands that he takes her back, but he refuses, explaining that he cannot allow Sophie to return to her world and reveal the existence of giants, which would start a giant hunt of his people. He doesn't want to be trapped inside a cage to be stared at. She promises not to tell anyone and that no one would believe her since she is a child, but the giant is adamant. He tells her that if she ventures out alone, she may be eaten by the 9 much larger giants, and that she's only safe staying with him. She tells him that both her parents were dead, so she's an orphan, and that he had taken her from an orphanage. He asks her how she's been treated there. She tells him that the matron was irresponsible, and she locked the kids inside a dark room as punishment. He tells her that she would be staying with him for the rest of their lives. He brings out a bottle with something inside which he calls dreams. He picks up her book and he reads to her after settling her at the top of a boat, making her fall asleep. He rushes out after she falls asleep to his workshop hidden by waterfalls. In his workshop, there are lots of dreams bottled up, so the giant makes a nightmare where Sophie escapes from the giant's home only to be captured by a very large giant who eats her. Sophie accuses him of sending her a nightmare, so he tells her that it's for her safety so that she doesn't leave his home, because all giants are cannibals. They are visited by the Fleshlumpeater, the infantile leader of the man-eating giants, who intrudes and demands a boo-boo on his finger to be fixed. He calls the friendly giant Runt. Sophie hides herself inside a disgusting vegetable called a snozzcumber when Fleshlumpeater smells her, so he picks up the vegetable which the elderly giant convinces him to eat, so he stops thinking about the human smell. But he peeks Sophie inside the snozzcumber, so he panics. He convinces Fleshlumpeater not to eat the vegetable because he hates it, so Fleshlumpeater drops it. Fleshlumpeater leaves after telling the giant what a disappointment he is to the Giant Country. The giant takes a soiled Sophie to wash and dry up at his workshop cave. He gives her something to wear from his stash of human clothes. He airs a space on a tree, telling her that it's where she would be staying. He tells her that he's going out to do his job, which was dream catching. She begs him to take her with him, but he refuses. Sophie continues persuading the friendly giant to take her to visit Dream Country. After so much persuasion, he agrees to take her with him. They try to sneak off quietly so as not to wake the sleeping giants, but they are unsuccessful. Sophie hides inside an abandoned car, dropping her blanket. She quietly tells him to fight back. The Fleshlumpeater asks the friendly giant where he was going while hanging him upside down. The friendly giant replies that he was going to work. The Fleshlumpeater and the other giants carry the friendly giant, throwing him around like a ball since they are all larger dropping than him. Rain starts to fall and it starts driving the man-eating giants into their cave. The friendly giant scoops Sophie into his bag. Fleshlumpeater finds Sophie's blanket plastered under his foot. He recognizes the smell as human. But fortunately, Sophie and the friendly giant get to Dream Country. Sophie is pleased to see so many stars. The friendly giant tells Sophie that someone had called him the big friendly giant. Sophie watches the reflection of a large tree on a pond, which seems to show the tree having lights all over it, which are dreams. The friendly giant jumps into the pond, which happens to be the entrance into the other side of the tree with dreams all over it. Sophie jumps after him, but she falls when landing, and the big friendly giant picks her and lifts her up. They both work together to catch a golden dream that happens to be Sophie's. Sophie tries catching a dream too, but she catches a bad one, which the friendly giant collects from her, and he traps it inside a glass jar. Sophie calls the friendly giant BFG, which basically means big friendly giant. They leave for London for BFG's nightly job. In London, he uses his dream trumpet to distribute good dreams to a boy and his parents who were all asleep. He explains the dream the boy was having to Sophie. They return to Giant Country to see that the other giants were departing to go eat the children. Sophie tells BFG not to let the other giants treat him the way they do and that they have to do something about the other giants' reactions towards him. She asks him if he had seen her blanket, and he tells her that he had thought it was with her. She remembers that she had dropped it at Giant Country, which leaves him thinking. Sophie wakes up to find herself in front of the orphanage. She mistakes it to be a dream, but BFG tells her that the other giants must know she's there because of her blanket, so she is not safe with him anymore. Sophie doesn't care, so BFG tells her about a boy that he had taken like Sophie who taught him how to read. He blames himself for not taking the boy back home before he was discovered and eaten by one of the giants. Sophie tries talking him out of it, but he doesn't listen to her. He moves to leave, but she follows him, telling him that she's not afraid, but BFG still leaves without her, not wanting to endanger her. Sophie heads into the orphanage heartbroken. Sophie calls on BFG, asking if he can hear her. She feels his presence and goes to the balcony. She climbs the balcony banister, hoping BFG will appear again to catch her, and he does. BFG takes Sophie back to Giant Country, unaware that he was being watched by Fleshlumpeater. Back at BFG's workshop, they both try to think of a plan so Sophie can stay when Fleshlumpeater calls on BFG. BFG tells Sophie to hide, which she does immediately, leaving her spectacles. BFG hides Sophie just when the giants come inside his workshop. BFG begs them to stop destroying his work by turning the place upside down, but they do not listen to him. Sophie finds the home of the boy BFG had told her about while evading the giants. Fleshlumpeater almost sniffs out her hiding place, so BFG chases them out of his home with a hot iron. Sophie sees a portrait of Elizabeth II, Queen of England, in the boy's belongings. After seeing all this, she gets an idea out of it. Sophie compliments BFG's English-speaking abilities, which makes him happy. She tells him about a plan to go to the Queen for help. They prepare a very scary nightmare of the 9 giants eating children in England, which they would make the Queen dream about. She tells BFG that after the Queen has the nightmare, Sophie and BFG would be there to introduce themselves to the Queen. BFG isn't in support of the Queen seeing him, but Sophie convinces him. They sneak into Buckingham Palace and deliver the nightmare to the Queen. The Queen wakes up from the terrifying dream and tells a member of the staff, Mary, about her nightmare of children being taken from the boarding house and eaten by giants. Mary sees a story on a newspaper about disappearing children, which seems odd. Mary draws the window to find Sophie on the windowsill, which surprises them. The Queen asks her how she got to the top of her window, so Sophie tells her that her friend BFG, who's a giant, had helped put her there. She tells the Queen that she and BFG had created the nightmare to show her what the giants were doing. Mr. Tibbs, the Queen's chief security, sends guards to the garden after Sophie mentions that BFG was in the garden. Sophie is asked to call her friend BFG, which she does a number of times, but he doesn't show up. So the Queen is about to send her away, but Sophie insists on calling BFG. She tells him to be brave. Meanwhile, BFG, who had hidden behind a tree, steps out, but he is surrounded by royal guards. Sophie pleads to the Queen not to hurt BFG, so the Queen commands that the royal guards should stand down. The royal guards look at him in awe. BFG bows to the Queen, and they plan to have a meeting and discuss during dinner. Sophie is dressed to dine with the Queen, as is BFG, who is invited into the palace. He is offered food, which he loves, and compliments. Sophie shows BFG how to take the coffee he is offered, but he doesn't like it so he spits it out. The war generals are also invited to the meeting to meet with BFG. They show BFG a map so he can show them how to get to Giant Country, but he doesn't know how to read a map. The Queen tells the generals that she had promised BFG that they would only be going to Giant Country once, so they should follow the BFG, to which BFG tells them that they won't be able to find his country twice. BFG offers everyone his hometown fizzy drink, which seems to make them gassy. BFG heads to his home with helicopters following him. He signals for them to stop somewhere. Sophie asks BFG what his plan is. BFG prepares a very horrible nightmare to get the giants to repent, instead of the invasion by humans, or instead of a war between giants and humans. But if it doesn't work, then they won't have a choice but to let them be taken away. In the morning, Sophie and BFG watch the giants sleeping with the glass containing the nightmares. BFG tells Sophie about her dream, which ends with her being in England. She asks him if he would still be able to hear her when she calls him. He smiles at her, asking her if she's forgotten about his sharp ears. When it's time to deliver the nightmares, BFG remembers that he forgot his dream trumpet at the palace, and he doesn't notice Sophie running towards the giants with the glass containing the nightmares. He goes after her. Sophie tries to open the glass, but she isn't fast enough because Fleshlumpeater wakes up. So Sophie smashes the glass instead, sending the nightmares flying. They enter all the giants who were still asleep, but Fleshlumpeater, who's awake, removes his and smashes it. The nightmares start affecting the other giants, so they wake up sobbing. Fleshlumpeater tries to go after Sophie, but BFG pushes him away. Again, the strong Fleshlumpeater tries to hurt BFG, but his hands are restrained. All the other giants were captured and restrained, and they were all transported out of giant country to an island with only grains as food. Sophie is then adopted by Kate, and now she leaves at the palace. The next day, she is woken up by Kate. She looks through the window where she sees giant country. She sees that BFG was planting other vegetables to make better soup. She also notices that he is writing his book. Sophie talks to BFG whenever she's lonely, and he hears her, and he smiles. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and subscribe. I would also appreciate a comment because it helps like you can't even imagine. It's a new channel and every bit of support counts.